love my mom. But growing up, she terrified me a little bit. She was this big, sassy woman who, I always thought she yelled when she spoke, but really she just had a really loud voice. And for me, I'm naturally quiet, so I tend to run from those people or hide from those people. And so growing up, I was the child who was always in trouble, so my mom knew how to strike fear into me by pulling out the wooden spoon. And it was a good week if I didn't receive it. Most of the times it was quite often. But one thing I realized about my mom was that she always encouraged my dreams, no matter what they were. And so when I was 16 years old and started following Jesus, she was like, all right, you do your thing, like that's, whatever you need to do, like go ahead and do it. And so she watched over the years my transformation as I started following this King. And I started to realize that my mom became more curious and more curious and more curious, wondering about this King in my life, because for her, she didn't have the easiest life growing up. And so the king that ruled her life was a king of bitterness, a king of anger. Because in her difficulties, she walled up and wouldn't let anybody take care of her or protect her. And so she started to watch me follow this king, and she eventually wondered enough to start following him. So 2 years ago, my mom started following Jesus. And sometimes phone calls from moms aren't always wanted, but I started to realize she called a lot more. And one night I was walking to the beach, and she called me. She goes, Crystal, your little sister and I are having a Bible study, and we keep reading this word over and over and over again. We don't know what it is, and we just want to know the simplest definition of what this word is. And she said, what does the word Messiah mean? And I said, oh, it means king. And there was a moment of silence and then a moment of realization. She goes, that makes so much sense. And so for her, in that moment, she started to understand the king that she had been following, understanding the rule in which he reigned over her life. And so I think there's some of us in this room that serve different kings. Kings who demand our time, demand our energy, demand our money, but don't give anything back in return. And so our hard work, we receive nothing. No protection, nothing. And so there's some of us that follow some of these kings in our life, whether that's kings of our work or kings of our good grades or kings of our families or whatever it may be, we probably follow some of these kings. But with my mom, her response to the true king and that realization, it changed her journey. It changed the woman that she became. And so in the story we'll see today, we'll watch how characters encounter two kings, and only one of them is the true king that changes their journey. So turn with me to Matthew 2, 1 through 12. Matthew 2, 1 through 12. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east were coming to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and the scribes and the people, he inquired to them where the Christ was to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers. For from you shall a ruler come who will shepherd the people of Israel. And when Herod summoned the wise men secretly, he told them and sent them off and said, go diligently and search for this child, and when you have found him, bring him word Bring me word of him, that I too may come and worship him." And after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, a star that they had seen when it rose before them, until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream, "Do not return to King Herod," and departed their own way, another way, back to their country. So we are introduced to the first character of the story, and it's the Magi. And we really don't know much about the Magi, even though they seem to play a main character roles in this story. We really don't know much. We don't know how many there were. Our tradition says 3, but other traditions say 12. We really don't know if there's a whole pack of them or just a few of them. We have no idea. We don't know exactly where they were coming from in the east either. So the only thing we really know is the news that they brought. Like if they were coming from Babylon, they would have traveled 900 miles following the star. 900 miles. That's walking from West Palm to Washington, D.C. Except for no restaurants, no sidewalks, no bathroom breaks, like no hotels. The realization of that, like, that journey was long. It was a long journey. And so what we do know is that they brought gifts and that they were on a journey to seek a king. And the first king, when it says in the text, when they encounter the first king, it's King Herod. And so, which is kind of assumed because King Herod was known as king of the Jews, so why wouldn't you go there first? Normally kings are born in castles or palaces or whatever it may be. And so they encounter King Herod and they bring this news. We would like to see the king who's been born. And his first response is that he's troubled. Now, the Magi were most likely pagans. And I can only imagine that encountering this king and like bringing him this good news and his response being that he's troubled, maybe that's a little interesting. Well, this king that they encountered was put in place by Rome. Illegitimate king. He was only half Jewish. And he was a king that was known for being cruel and paranoid and oppressive. He was so paranoid about protecting his kingship that he killed 2 of his own sons. 2 of his own sons, his flesh and blood, because of fear of being overthrown. And he was greedy because of the cruel taxes he put on his own people. He made people suffer for his own actions. Maybe this is the king you serve, but you don't receive anything back from it. So after King Herod says, go, depart. Go find this child and bring back the news of him so I might go worship him. A worship of manipulation. And so they leave and they depart. And the second king that enters into the story, it says when they go into a house, which is a little different than a manger. So by this time, people assume that Jesus is around 2 years old. So he's a child when they enter in and they realize who he is. And so, can you imagine walking in and seeing a child and thinking, why was Herod so bent out of shape over a child who can barely even talk? An innocent, swordless king. And something else that's interesting about this king that he's so worried about is that Jesus was given the title King of the Jews. King, Messiah, Jesus. Normally when children are born into royalty, they are given dukes or princes or whatever it may be, and that time frame is kind of, they like work their way up until they've come to maturity and then are given the title king because somebody else is holding their place. But Jesus is given the title king the moment he's born. Fascinating. And so, since Jesus' birth, he's been interrupting and disrupting what is normal. This king that they saw, they worshipped out of adoration. They wouldn't have known that he was fully divine and fully human or any of that because believers didn't even know for the longest time. They couldn't understand that concept. But their worship was a worship out of adoration, awe of him being king. He was a child. He was the true king, unlike King Herod. This false king, or temporary king, King Herod, fought for the title. Jesus, King Jesus, was given the title. Herod followed the Gentile star of his crown, and Jesus is the Davidic star. Herod is the king who lies. Jesus is the king who is truth. Herod is the king who kills, and Jesus is the king who is killed. Herod worked his way to the top, killed his way to the top, and Jesus served his way to the top. King Herod eliminates, and Jesus evaluates. And so, for a moment, to think about the way that Jesus rules his kingdom in this time of celebrating his birth of Christmas, we understand that he's a child, but we know, looking back, and we can see the goodness and celebration of his life because of his life, death, and resurrection. But to take a moment and look at his life, to think about this for a second, being a part of this kingdom that he has brought to earth. If you are a part of this kingdom, you are somebody. You are royalty. Because if you are part of the kingdom, you are the king's kid. You are giving a status. So you are elevated into this kingdom. There are no nobodies in this kingdom. So when you think about the kingdom of Herod, there was one man who had all the power and influence, who saw life was not valued because of how much he took it away. And so the Magi saw the difference between these two kings very clearly, because after encountering Herod, they left and just continued on their journey. Their journey was still the same. And what's interesting in the text, the last verse in 12, it says, "And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod." Notice that they don't call him King Herod anymore. It's just Herod. They departed to their own country by another way. So after encountering the true king of this kingdom, their journey was changed and altered. And so we all serve a king. We were all designed to serve a master, a king. We were all designed to follow something. And maybe you're like my mom and we're unsure of what it meant for Jesus to be king in your life. My question is which king are you encountering? Which king rules over your life? Is it the king of your work, the king of good grades, the king of your job, the king of your family, the king of approval, the king of anger? Which king reigns over your life? Because that permeates the way that you live your life. And my challenge to you this Christmas season, and in every season of your life, evaluate the king that you serve. ask yourself where you invest your time the most, because that will reveal a lot about who your king is. Jesus changes the journeys of our lives.